Yeah, I love how scripture is amazingly supernaturally relevant for today. And I started reading Proverbs 31 mainly because I think that the church weaponized it against women.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as I started really exploring that passage, the Proverbs, I think most places call it like the Proverbs 31 wife. I would call it the wise or the excellent, the noble woman.
Well, hello everyone. Today I get a chance to sit there and catch up with a dear, dear, dear friend, someone who I love dearly, Dr. Hannah Stolze, who I reported to under the Center for Faith and Innovation at Wheaton College for about 2 years. And one of the saddest things that I'm disappointed by, Hannah, is I don't get a chance to work with you or talk with you as much because we're doing two different things, but we're no longer in the same organization. So I enjoy these times with you, Hannah.
Yeah, Tommy, I'm so grateful for the years we were able to overlap and work together, and it definitely deepened my respect for you. So I'm excited to be here to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. Dr. Hannah Stolze is the William E Crenshaw Chair of Supply Chain Management for Baylor University. Hannah, before we start, I mean, you've lived in different parts of the world, St. Louis, Illinois, then now in Texas, especially in the Waco area. How is life like in the Waco area?
Well, I will say Texas, I think saw itself as its own nation for a little while many years ago. So it's definitely a different culture um, you know, to the Midwest where I'm from. And it's definitely a lot hotter. I think last weekend, middle of October, it was still over 100 degrees. So
Wow.
Texas is definitely a hot state, but we've really come to love Waco. The cities in Texas is a really diverse state with lots of big cities in it. And Waco kind of sits in the middle of all
Yeah.
those cities as a small community. And we've really found just a lot of great Christian communities here that are doing a lot of work and amazing people at Baylor. So Waco is not just Fixer Upper and Chip and Joanna Gaines. There's a lot of really cool things going on here. That's fun to be a part of.
Fixer Upper, Joanna Gaines, then you think about David Koresh, all of those different things. But Waco is a unique, like for instance, what is something that you guys enjoy doing as a family over in Waco?
Well, believe it or not, we're about a mile from I think it's not even a state park, but a pretty big park. It's got about over 30 acres of hiking trails all along the river. And I think that's kind of our favorite like getaway spot because it almost feels Midwestern with like, the river cliffs,
Yeah,
all of that. So we like to get out and walk and be out in nature. And of course, Waco is full of great barbecue and Tex-Mex
yeah.
and all of that we do love. So eating and then hiking so that we can eat more.
And a lot of times this whole idea of supply chain management, it really, I would say, didn't get onto everyone's radar until COVID, when the supply chain was really messed up. Would you agree, disagree with that statement? And talk to me a little bit about supply chain and why leaders, young leaders from around the world should pay attention to supply chain, the conversation around that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tommy. Supply chain management is a relatively youngish field. I think during the Industrial Revolution, for the most part, companies were really focused on local manufacturing and local markets, and the world has globalized, in the last 100 years for sure. And COVID definitely gave people visibility to their dependence on global supply chains, right? When you shut down
Mhm.
ports and you shut down, access to different materials, people all of a sudden become aware, oh my goodness, like so many of our products, especially in the US, are coming from places all around
Yes.
the world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so supply chain kind of went from, the like a secondary stage to main stage in 2020. And, in recent years, I would say more than 50% of CEOs say that they're investing more in their supply chains for resilience and to make sure that they can get product to their customers. And so I would say, if CEOs are making it a priority, any of us in business should be paying attention to what's going on in the supply chain world.
Yeah, yeah. Would you say a lot of times with everything is the supply chain back to normal now with everything that was going on COVID, or it still has a little bit to go? Where are we at right now in terms of a lot of that?
Yeah, anytime there's a big, huge disruption in business, things don't ever go back to exactly the way they were before, right?
Yeah.
Things get disrupted along the way that stay disrupted forever. And so I think leading up to COVID 19 and in 2020, Leading up to that, we were already seeing a lot of macro trends, like, kind of happening around the world, geopolitical trends, with countries becoming a little bit more isolationist and more nationally focused. So we were starting to see our trade agreements shift anyway, right? Leading up to, that time, that point into the history. So we'd already seen, a lot of uncertainty coming from Brexit, coming from,
Yeah.
the China US kind of trade tensions and all of that. But what COVID did, COVID interestingly gave a lot of power to shipping companies that they hadn't had
Yeah.
before. So
Yeah.
it totally, we saw changes in the price of container shipping. I know I live in an exciting world, but we saw a change in pricing on container shipping that was unprecedented. We hadn't seen changes in pricing in those spaces for a really long time, but because we were so dependent on those vessel ships to move product, and even companies were air freighting a lot of things they normally would have shipped on the water, it gave those companies more power than they'd had in a long time. So prices aren't going to go back to what they were pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And our understanding of how reliant we are on different products, especially like semiconductors, and those are component parts that go into products. When you're
Yeah.
thinking supply chain, like, we have semiconductor suppliers in other places in the world to make products that we want to consume here in the US, or wherever you are in the world. You're probably buying parts that go into the end product. And so we realized, gosh, we need to think through, what products do we need to make locally, and what products are we
Yes.
okay buying globally? And I think that's
Yeah.
not going to go back to the way it was before.
Hannah, on a separate note, I know you and I know each other. Did you know for a period of 6 months while I was in seminary, I worked for a freight forwarding shipping company? My area was ships, and I had to monitor all of the ships and monitor when the containers were coming in. And so, to the degree, I do understand a little bit where you're coming from.
Yeah, I had no idea, Tommy. I didn't know that at all. That's great.
Yeah. And now, like, for instance, in is it still the key area? Is it Asia? Is it Africa? Is it somewhere in South America? Where are the hot spots you're saying there, Tommy? When we think about shipping, Asia still is the key area, especially through ships. What would you say?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about like where the US is sourcing from, so I'll be a little bit US centric. I'm sorry if we have
Yeah.
listeners other places in the world. But for the US in particular, we are still dependent on China because they have so much of the manufacturing know-how that the US and other global companies have invested in China over the last 50 years. So there are some things that, like, we just can't beat Chinese prices and Chinese manufacturing skills to move product or move manufacturing somewhere else. But
Yeah.
what we did see in the last year that I think is really interesting, for the first time since I've been in supply chain management, Mexico passed up China as the number one
Yeah. Yeah.
global
Yeah. Yeah.
partner
Yeah.
for the US in terms of imports and products coming into the US through
Got
Mexico.
it.
Now, it doesn't mean those products, like if you're thinking about like a Honeywell, thermostat in your house, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean like maybe that product, the finished product, is coming from Mexico to the US, but it might have spent some time in China as well. It's just that finished
Got it.
product is coming into the
Yep.
US
Finished product.
from
Yep.
Mexico. Mm-hmm.
Now, is there a city or a certain region of the world that's emerging that you're sitting there, Tommy? Pay attention to this particular region or part of the world because they are improving and growing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, from a US standpoint, we're going to be looking at Central America and how
Mhm.
we work and do manufacturing and move products from there. But also, Southeast Asia is going to be a key area
Yeah.
of the world, both in terms of raw materials as well as manufacturing skills. That we're not just looking at reshoring or nearshoring. So, like, moving manufacturing that close to us, we're also thinking about friendshoring. So, what
Yeah.
are the governments and the economies that we can play well with, and
Yeah.
that we want to start moving manufacturing to?
Like, Hannah, even a little simple. I was in Tokyo a couple of summers ago and sitting down and talking with the folks in Tokyo. They were saying there, for the most part, a lot of times the young Japanese are leaving Japan. And in the past, it was Americans and Koreans, and there was Panasonic and Sony. Well, with the rise of Samsung, a lot of these guys, Koreans, are staying in Korea because they get higher. So as a result, Japan is bringing in a lot more Brazilians and
Mhm.
Vietnamese. And then when I was in Sao Paulo recently this past summer, there's large pockets of Japanese community. That really changes up how you look at supply chain, relationships, all of those things.
Yeah, and I think, when you're looking at countries' economic growth, one of the drivers of economic growth is population growth. So just having more
Yeah.
people to sell product to. And so as you think about, different countries that are going to grow, the countries that are going to have the labor resources and, and markets are going to be countries that have growing populations and not shrinking populations as well. So population is a big part of where we do business in the world.
Yeah. So with students, are you seeing more and more of an increase in students applying to be majors in supply chain? Are there new jobs that are developing because of all this? How is being a professor now different than 10 years ago or 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think some things never change. How we teach inventory and routing and all those exciting things. I think pretty much stay the same foundations. I would say that the world has changed a lot since I started off. I think the last up until 2016 to 2020, I think we had a much easier global economy for moving products around the world. And, our trade, our tariffs, our trade partnerships were really in favor of products being international. And I think in the last 10 years, we've kind of not seen a reverse of that, but we've seen much more nationalization, much more localization. And this is really important if you're in industries that are relying on other countries or raw materials from other places in the world. So supply chain students have always needed to be, junior macroeconomists in some ways. But I think the shift of global dynamics is always going to change how we look at the world from a global supply chain perspective and how we teach our students to pay attention to what's going on in the world around them. I would say the disruption has accelerated a lot more in the last 5 years than,
Yeah.
in the 10 years I taught before that. We're paying a lot
Yeah.
more attention to disruption and resilience and risk assessments and all of that.
Yeah. When you take students to different places, whether it's in Southeast Asia or other parts of the world, what are you trying to show these students, or are you hoping that they'll learn through as they visit these other countries?
Yeah, when any student only has a national perspective of the place they've grown up and lived all their lives, it's really it's really easy in business to think of your job and your tasks and your job just as transactions. So you're pushing an order button, kind of like on Amazon, or you're negotiating a price point, and it's easy to kind of think about it really abstractly, like, oh, it's just dollars and products. But Tommy, this when you work in a business or in an organization, it's not just products and dollars, it's people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one
Yeah.
of my biggest goals, so whether, no matter where you are in the world, if you haven't traveled, get out and travel. Because the decisions you make in a transaction in business don't just impact, the dollars that move back and forth or the products that get made. They actually impact people's lives. And
Mhm.
one of my goals for my students, especially students who are going to go into buying or inventory strategy or supplier, selection kind of decisions in the future, is I want them to realize what is the true cost of taking a quarter out of the price of a product.
Mhm.
Because it feels like, oh, it's just going to hit our bottom line, but for a factory somewhere else in the world, if you're still, buying 40,000 units at a time and it's a large transaction, if you're squeezing every dollar out of them, it's probably not going to impact the management. It's probably going to impact the lives and the pay of their
Yeah.
workers. And so you really want to be aware of the ecosystem of the supply chain that you're in and the impact that your decisions have, not just on getting product to market more cheaply or, to meet customer need, but the impact on the lives of the people that are engaged in the work that you need to get done.
And these days, with the rise of AI, is that being incorporated? Is that part of the discussions that you have to help students process through these days?
Yeah, I think one of the keys with AI, and I don't know, if you're a listener and you've played around with AI or Chat GPT or, whatever, Copilot or, there's lots of different options now, is you need a baseline of knowledge to know whether or not it's actually correct.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've ever, it's great for like writing an email or something where you can go through and tweak it, but it's not so great if you're asking it to analyze data or to provide you with resources. You need to have a baseline understanding of the field to know if it's even accurate. So I
Yeah.
think at
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
at the fundamental level, you still need knowledge so that you can assess what AI is telling you. And then the other space that AI, I think, is actually really fun and great is that AI can be utilized to do a lot of the kind of routine things and
Yeah. Yeah.
tasks of the job. that free workers and free supply chain professionals up to be a little bit more strategic, because AI can do some of the more routine tasks now.
Yeah, yeah. For you personally, as now as a professor, did you have thoughts that you wanted to be a professor when you were younger? Like when you were in grade school or high school? Was that a dream, or what did you think you were going to be doing, Hannah?
Tommy, I don't know if you know this about me, but when I was in middle school, I thought I would grow up to be an orthodontist.
Hmm.
Mainly because I had braces at the time, and I was thinking through what my parents had spent on my braces and how many people that were sitting in the lobby to get their braces. And I thought, hey, if I become an orthodontist, I will be economically set for the rest of my life. Um, so I moved on from, thinking that I would work in the teeth industry, obviously. And the couple things that I've always loved, I love writing. I've always really loved making an argument and a case for something. So initially, I thought I would do law. I did an undergrad in political economics and Mandarin and Asian studies, and I really wanted to go on to
Yeah,
law school. And it was
yeah.
actually through the military that I ended up recognizing the global importance of business and the opportunity, especially in supply chain spaces, to work globally in ways that are really unique to working in a government or a legal sector.
Yeah. Now, you and I have chatted about this, and I think we've talked about this before. How did you end up in our military as well, too? Because you were a war correspondent, and you did a bunch of different roles within that military.
Yeah, I mean, at 17, 18, I joined the military to pay for college. And I thought I would get some good training along the way, right?
Yeah,
So it wasn't super strategic, but I didn't have I grew up very middle class, blue collar American, and you're looking at college as expensive, and I knew even then that I definitely was on the trajectory, wanted to go to grad school. And so the military seemed just like a great way, especially at the time if I wanted to do global work in, law. I thought that I would do like, the foreign diplomat corps or go into some kind of, government kind of agency like that.
yeah.
And so I started off in the Army actually as a cultural analyst in PsyOps, thinking that would be my trajectory. And then after 9/11 got moved into ordnance. So that kind of moved me into like more of the supply chain space.
Yeah, yeah,
And then
yeah.
I worked in public affairs and, doing more of the correspondence work. But yeah, initially it was not strategic at all. It was really just to get the GI Bill. And then I thought I would go, green to gold and go JAG and get law school paid for. And God had definitely different plans for my life.
Yeah. As you look back, now you're a professor, you're educating and training students of this next generation. What did your time in the military, how did that lay a foundation that shaped you as a leader today?
Yeah, I think on the initial kind of upfront, the military really helped me um, understand a different type of leadership style for sure. And I think there's something good about being commissioned, like the military does, is you recognize like, okay, I have the responsibility of having an authority in a room that I think has helped me as an academic. Like say, okay, well, this is the responsibility I have to lead in a certain way. Um, I do also think that when you are selling your ideas to leadership within your academic institution,
Mhm.
or you're in a boardroom, doing a research presentation, or even walking into an executive MBA class, it certainly doesn't hurt for them to know that you have experience in munitions and explosives, because they're not quite sure how to take you. So just from a standpoint of like, to set them all, a little bit at dissies. I think that's a word. But in a more serious note, I think that the military gave me an understanding for a different style of leadership, and a lot of what we know, it kind of goes back and forth. The industry learning from the military, and then the military learning from industry in terms of how to move product. And I definitely gained a lot of insights. And I would never have known how to drive a truck if it hadn't been for the Army. So I did have a truck
Yeah, yeah.
license. I drove forklifts. I drove cranes. So, having that hands-on experience, I think we
Yeah,
all want professors who have done what they teach us at least a
yeah,
little bit of their lives, right?
yeah, yeah. And plus, at the same time, here you are a lot of times going to military, probably starting at the bottom, working up yourself through the ranks. So, in some sense, you understand what these guys feel. You understand what they have to deal with. And now, even there, you understand how everything works, that you're able to plug and play and teach all these things.
Yeah, starting off
Yeah.
enlisted, and I never ended up taking a commission after 9/11. I didn't want to stay career and go additional 4 years, so I stayed enlisted the entire time. And I've realized in the last couple of years, it's really developed in me an empathy for frontline workers, whether they're frontline soldiers, whether they're, frontline factory workers, frontline warehouse workers, frontline truck drivers, that we sometimes kind of can ignore in our economy, almost the invisible hand that moves and makes and brings our products to us. And I think in recent years, especially in my research and how I teach, it's given me a different kind of empathy for the people that do the hard work so that we can have the stuff that we want, which is what supply chains kind of do, right?
Hannah, a lot of times I want to introduce you to one day. A lot of times I was just at Wheaton and we hosted Tandian Rustandi. Tandian oversees and is the CEO and founder of the largest ceramic tiles company in all of the world. But he emphasized to the students the importance of taking care of the frontline workers, because he says the one thing that hit me is I am a beneficiary. My wife, my family, all of that stuff during COVID was a beneficiary of all the frontline workers. What does it mean to take care of them? What does it mean to make sure that they're taken care of? All of those things. And I think you, as a Christ follower who's leading a business, you've got to think about these things.
Yeah. And as a Christ follower, also you want to think about the dignity of their work. And, they're made, we aren't just made in the image of God as managers or leaders. Like all of humanity is made in the image of God. And we have a pretty specific call to love our neighbor and to love humanity like God loves us. And so I think that is really important. And, if you don't treat your workers well, it's expensive to retrain. It's expensive to find workers. You have to pay them more if nobody wants to work for you. Yeah. And so there's a business cost, but I think there's also an eternal cost to not paying attention to the dignity of humans and people.
Hannah, I learned this really well. I built cell towers for 10 years, as you probably know. And my very first job when we were building cell towers, I was in the file room. We had just acquired 200 towers from Verizon Wireless. All the files came in. There was no order to do all those files. My role was to organize that file room and to put all the information in databases. But I learned what it meant to treat every single person with the dignity that they knew, whether it was the front desk receptionist, whether it's the guys who clean your washroom, whether it's the accounting, sales, lawyer, all of that. Because it's easy to treat your boss with respect because you need something from your boss. But what does it mean to really, as a Christ follower, treat everyone as special, despite what they do for a living, that everyone is equal in the eyes of God?
Yeah. And it's becoming even more important. We're seeing a lot more especially with the increased kind of gig economy in the US. And we're seeing a lot of things get Uberized, right? Last mile delivery and how products even move into market. So, delivery if you ordered a product and it came to your house 20 years ago, 3 different companies were going to deliver that product, right? It was going to be the Postal Service, FedEx, or UPS.
Yeah.
And today, if you order food, if you order, a package from Amazon, it could show up from an Amazon driver or it could show up from an Uber driver or, Uber Eats and so we have a lot more people that are working independently, but they're being managed by algorithms and they're not trained as well for their jobs. And so there's been a big shift in kind of what the workforce looks like in the US that I think we need to pay attention to because it could affect our access to products down the road if we don't.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned something. How then do you address that with your students? What do you guys talk about? What does class discussions around the topic look like then?
Yeah. So for students, we're thinking that they're getting an undergrad degree. They're going to leave Baylor, with a bachelor's in supply chain management, and they're going to go out and they're going to work for a company. And probably the first 5 years are going to be in an entry level, more analytical role, or where they're not going to have decision making or high level decision making. Influence, but really the goal is for our students to not to think about what the work that they do is transactional and to understand the system that they're operating in. So Tommy, even like for your example, when you're working in cell towers and you had to go in and create order out of chaos, right?
Yeah.
We want our students to be aware that sometimes, that maybe that wasn't a very fun task for you. Maybe students aren't excited to go into a dirty warehouse and make it a better place to work for the people that work there. But when you create order out of chaos, it makes other people's jobs easier.
Yep.
Going into a clean warehouse is much nicer than going into a dirty warehouse. Going
Yep.
into a lit place is better than. And so realizing that the impact of their work, even if it's like low level, even if it's a small thing,
Yep.
can improve somebody else's work experience. And,
Yes.
and then, okay, there is a business case. They probably are going to be more productive, and, they're not going to be as likely to leave you and all of that. But there's also the case that let's just make people's lives better around us.
Yeah. And more so, the one thing I also learned is, Lord, can I be faithful to where you put me right now? Because what I didn't know is God was using that opportunity to instill in me values in order that to this day, I am always ordered on the front end. So I know where everything is going. And so the discipline of being organized. And so like, for instance, David, before David became king and before he defeated Goliath and all that stuff, what was he doing? He was tending the father's sheep. And because
Yeah.
of that, he learned what it meant to take care of the sheep, protect the sheep. Probably the days were boring. It was the same thing over and over and over again. But he learned how to protect the sheep. And it was that very thing that was ultimately going to allow him to defeat Goliath.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even students going out and, we want them to have the hard skills and the analytical skills to make good business decisions, but we want them to have the soft skills and the people
Yeah.
skills to be aware of their impact on, even their own coworkers, right? We have an impact on people around us, and we need to be faithful with whatever task we're given. I think that's a great point, Tommy.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, Hannah, two other questions, and I like catching up with you from time to time and talking to you about leadership examples, what you're doing, all this stuff. If you look back at your life, what was one mistake that you made in your life that really impacted you and was a defining moment in your life that shaped you as a person?
You're talking about career-wise, personally?
Career-wise, as you look back, a decision that you made, a decision you didn't make, something you could have wished you did, all of that. What was something that you look back and say, man, I learned from that, a mistake. I learned from that lesson.
Yeah, that's a great question. Let me think about that. I think career-wise, um, I think the transition from the military to my first civilian job was probably one of the hardest transitions I made. And I think it's hard, especially for women. I think that we have a tendency, so not everybody, but I would say, the research kind of shows that women tend to undersell themselves. And we tend to not apply or be aggressively pushed for jobs that we don't think we're 100% qualified for. Whereas men will apply for a job and be very confident that they should get a job that they're 50% qualified for. That, on average, women think, oh, I need to have 100% of these qualifications. And so I think early on in my career, I didn't necessarily push or negotiate enough for what things I should have asked for along the way. And so I think there were probably different phases and different seasons, both in my academic career as well as in, the work I did in industry. I worked as a buyer for a small import company. I think I should have negotiated more. And what feels in the moment like you're being selfish is actually being smart about having the right resources that you need to do your job and thrive in life. And I think looking back, I wish I could tell my younger self, negotiate more or don't settle and push a little harder. Some of those things, I guess we get wisdom with age, I hope. Are we getting wiser with age, Tommy? I think so.
Well, Hannah, going back with what you were saying is, as a Christian, I had to learn that I always thought working in a Christian ministry, I can't brag about myself. I can't talk. I have to be humble and meek. And I'm going to let my hard work speak for itself. I had to grow and understand that I'm not going to brag about myself and be conceited and arrogant, but I did have to let people know what I was doing. And how do I do it in a very humble way, but still be very direct on what I need?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard lesson to learn. Like, how do you, demonstrate that you're stewarding your work well by saying, this is what I have. Like, you have to show the master that you made a return on investment, right? In a way that realizing that, you do the work, but at the end of the day, it is God's, all of our work is to the glory of God, and not, giving God credit for the Holy Spirit giving us grace and wisdom along the way is really important as well. But it is hard. It's hard to do that work of kind of building your personal brand and demonstrating the work, taking the credit for the work that you've done. Because sometimes we know, even in Christian spaces, other people will take credit for the work you've done if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do. Hey, in the minute that we have left, talk to me about your book that you have written in Proverbs.
Yeah, I love how scripture is amazingly supernaturally relevant for today. And I started reading Proverbs 31 mainly because I think that the church weaponized it against women.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as I started really exploring that passage, the Proverbs, I think most places call it like the Proverbs 31 wife. I would call it the wise or the excellent, the noble woman. The
Mm-hmm.
word aset chayel is actually like the valiant woman. That's what it means. And in that passage, really the work that I did in my book and the work that I continue to do and delight in is the fact that in that passage we see a woman entrepreneur who
Yep.
has a healthy relationship with her husband. Her kids seem happy. They're rising up and praising her. But in the ancient Near East, she's running a global supply chain, transforming textiles and wool and flax into garments and clothing and curtains and drapes that she's selling in the marketplace to merchants, and that she's using the profit of her company to build vineyards and to buy fields and give to the poor and the needy. And I think that Proverbs 31 is the most beautiful entrepreneurial business models in all of Scripture. And I love it. It never gets old to me. There's so much in it just in terms of how we treat people, how we do our work, how we work with excellence. But we do it because it gives us the opportunity to give back to our communities and to make the cities that we live in better. And it's all there in Proverbs 31, 10 through 31.
Yep.
It's one of my favorite passages in Scripture, probably always
Yep.
will be.
Yep. And that's the part, here we are sitting there looking at it. And the one thing I appreciate about learning from you is every time people look at Proverbs 31, they talk about this wife or what a wife should be. You taught me the importance of how this person was a leader and how Proverbs 31 was the blueprint for what a leader should be. So thank you very much, Hannah.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's an awesome passage.
Yeah. Hannah, if people want to find out more about you, social media, website, where can you find more about you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. I have a website that's hannahstolze.com. That's pretty easy. You can find me there. And I do have Instagram, and LinkedIn probably is where I'm most active. But yeah, you can find me online.
Yep. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thanks, Tommy.
All right. We'll talk soon.